Exactly 30 minutes past the hour. Now, a throwback soundbite tonight comes from former South African President Thabo Mbeki. His quote-unquote, "I am an African," was a speech made on behalf of the African National Congress in Cape Town on 8th May 1996 on the occasion of the passing of the new constitution of South Africa. Let's listen into that.
I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frosts and in our latter-day snows. It has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. The crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lashed by startling lightning, have been a cause both of trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veldt. The dramatic shapes of the Drakensberg, the soil-colored waters of the Likwa, Iqeli, Notugela, and the sands of the Kalahari have all been panels of the set on the natural stage on which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. At times, and in fear, I have wondered whether I should concede equal citizenship of our country to the leopard and the lion, the elephant and the springbok, the hyena, the black mamba, and the pestilential mosquito. A human presence among all of these, a feature on the face of our native land just defined, I know that none dare challenge me when I say I am an African.
Now, straight to our studio discussion tonight. Despite the release of thousands of political prisoners and talk of reforms, the political climate remains more uncertain than ever in Africa's second most populous country of Ethiopia. It's now feared that any government measure to suppress ensuing chaos could result in more violence and deaths. Experts say instability in Ethiopia could have repercussions across the region, affect regional peace efforts, more so because Ethiopia is also home to so many cross-border communities. Already in Kenya, there are those who are already in Kenya, or more than 10,000 asylum seekers that have fled Ethiopia. Now, what will this mean for Kenya and by extension, the region? In studio, once again, I'm joined by political economist Eddie Gisheru, as well as Abel Uyeyo, who is an international relation expert. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we couldn't get a representative from the government because they've still remained mum on the asylum seekers situation there in the border town of Moyale. But Abel, let me begin with you. Of course, Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies. It's the second populous. It's home to the African Union. It has its peace forces in Somalia. It's initiating talks between, rebels in South Sudan. I mean, there are those who say that instability in Ethiopia could be disastrous for the region.
Well, that is a statement that is totally correct because of the significance of Ethiopia in the Eastern Africa setting. It's a country that is surrounded by, of course, Kenya, there is Somalia, and there's a lot of outflow of commerce from Ethiopia to its neighbors. So when it does the kind of political turmoil or upheaval that we've witnessed, it means the kind of benefits the neighbors have enjoyed over the last few years, actually since 1991, will cease to exist. And there's the possibility of violence, of course, trickling to places like Kenya and possibly Somalia. So that is a serious problem. So the statement is correct to the effect that the neighbors will experience that kind of problem. Yes.
We're going to talk about the status of the 10,000 plus asylum seekers who fled from Ethiopia into Kenya shortly. But let me engage Eddie here, who is a political economist. Now, Eddie, if you critically look at the situation in Ethiopia, apparently the uprising there has mainly been fueled by both political and economic equality. The Oromo and the Amhara, the Oromo who are the majority in Ethiopia, say that they've been locked out by the ruling class. I mean, this seems to be the same script with so many other African countries. It always boils down to equal, distribution of resources.
Certainly, Yusuf. I think that when you look at Ethiopia and the current crisis as it unfolds, you need to appreciate three things. Number one is that Ethiopia was never colonized, and therefore the economic permutation of Ethiopia comes from the backdrop that it was not colonized, so that you find that Ethiopia has had a feudal economy, basically, which at the best form of improvement have been imperial economy. I mean, it's just in the last 2 or 3 years that we are seeing Ethiopia making an attempt to coming to a liberal economy, but again, it's struggling because there have been a lot of years before this. Number two, you have to appreciate the fact that there are 3 competing ethnic communities, if you may, in Ethiopia, with the leading community being the Oromo, who make about 36% of the population. And then the second one is Amhara, which makes about 26% of the population. But then the smallest being the Tigray, which makes about 6% of the population. Now, if you look at the one issue that I started with, petitioning of the feudal kind of economy, you find that the smallest group, the Tigray community, is the one that actually controls the government and therefore the instruments of power, as well as the means and economic factors of production in the economy. And then the last one that you have to consider as you look into this crisis is the fact that we have got key international players in the Ethiopian economy. One, we start with the neighboring countries, which Eritrea is famously known about the struggle between Eritrea and Ethiopia, so that you find that we've had border disputes. I mean, in 1990s, we had a situation whereby Eritrea and Ethiopia had outstanding war on these border disputes. And then if you look at the north, we have got Egypt that has got also economic interest emerging from Ethiopia, which is the issue of the Nile dam project by Ethiopian government, which essentially is seen as going to be causing a serious crisis of water to the Egyptian community.
Yes.
But then lastly, you also look at other international players like China and other countries who are coming into this country with a lot of investment.
Yes, Eddie, we are going to talk about investment, especially by foreign countries shortly.
Yes.
But let me engage Abel here. Abel, once again, this is a country that has more than 100 million people. Projections are that these numbers could increase maybe in the coming few years. And if you look at the entire East African community, that is Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, and the rest, it accumulates to about 150 million. So clearly, this is a country that has a huge population. And once again, if you look at the East African region, Burundi is not that, the politics is not that good. We are seeing crisis in DRC. I mean, Somalia, things are not that fine. Do you think the region can afford to have an unstable country in the name of Ethiopia?
Of course not. I think we've had so much, and in terms of conflicts and chaos and all that and wars, and I don't think we're ready for another, outburst of violence in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, I think, is a representation of the kind of problem we have in terms of our governments. Now, when you look at Rwanda, for instance, the kind of economic distribution among the people is exactly what's going on in Ethiopia. The smallest group controls the greatest part of the economy. So over time, there is simmering tension and discontent, and of course, at some point, it bursts out and becomes violent. So what's going to happen is, I think East Africans and by extension Africans need to realize that the only lasting form of government is a democracy. Of course, according to Thomas Paine, democracies do not go to war, they don't fight. But once you have a dictatorship, the way Ethiopia is and the way Rwanda is, you can have some kind of peace for a while, like 2-3 years. But over time, it breaks down. Society breaks down. So I think this is a moment for Ethiopians to actually come out and install the kind of government they want, a democracy.
And I think we're seeing that happening, or most people remain optimistic that after the state of emergency, perhaps that we're going to see a lot of reforms there. Yeah. Of course, only time will tell. Now, Eddie, once again, as a political economist, despite the economic growth that we're seeing in Ethiopia, it was ranked some time back as the third fastest growing, is it, in Africa, and clearly, from your own perspective, it seems, without proper democracy, without good governance, if a country gains economically, then it's all in vain.
I don't think so. I mean, as I was trying to give you the history, Yusuf, when you have an economy that, first of all, is closed, and number two, it doesn't trickle to all the communities that are there, they're going to be conflict. It doesn't matter whether it's democracy or dictatorship. What needs to happen, first of all, the whole idea around Ethiopian economic boom, I think is a narrative that is predicated by the outside world, but it doesn't actually indicate the idea of inclusive economic growth. For instance, you find that Ethiopia grows at a rate of about 8%. A country like Kenya grows at a rate of about 5.8%. But you'll find that when you come to look at things that actually do define economic wellness of a community or a country, then you find that countries like Kenya are ahead. So, for instance, if you look at the GDP of Ethiopia, is higher than Kenya. But if you look at as indices such as GDP per capita, which is basically how much is this wealth distributed among the population, you find that Kenya is way ahead at about $3,000 US, and Ethiopia is about 2,000. So the key here being the historical marginalization of communities such as Oromo and the Amhara become critical, and the main idea here would be to solve this conflict is about inclusive growth and inclusiveness in political and social permutation of the Ethiopian economy.
And I think that is what the main members, most members of the opposition have been fighting for. Now, Abel, I'm sure you'll agree with me that most African countries, share some sort of a cross-border societies. The same can be said between Kenya and Ethiopia. For example, the Oromo, the majority in Ethiopia, but they're minority here in Kenya. The same can be said of Nuer, who are in South Sudan, as a majority, but minority in Ethiopia. And we're seeing some sort of a refugee influx. I don't know if they're yet to be termed as refugees. They can be termed as asylum seekers for now, from Ethiopia, about 10,000 plus. Kenya's already started feeling the hit from the Ethiopian crisis, right?
Yeah, certainly. I think, and of course, Kenya has been on the receiving end when it comes to the refugee issue. Of course, recently we pushed for the closure of Dadaab, and of course, there were so many refugees. Now, I think we cannot close one refugee camp only to open another. And according to Ethiopian authorities, of course, they've claimed the refugees have gone back, which is false. We still have quite a number remaining at Moyale on the side of Kenya. So Kenya has begun feeling the heat. And what we need to do, of course, as a country, not just Kenya, but the neighbors, neighboring countries, that is Kenya, Somalia. Of course, Somalia has its own problems. So I don't think it should be expected to lead the way in, pushing for democratic space expansion in Ethiopia. Kenya actually has to lead the way. And so as to make sure when there are problems in Ethiopia, they don't get here. And at the end of the day, that is why it's very necessary for African countries to pay attention to what's happening in neighboring countries. For example, Kenya cannot just sit by and watch as, for example, bad things happen in a place like Ethiopia or Uganda or Tanzania, because at the end of the day, we have to feel the heat. I don't think we have the resources to take care of refugees. We cannot feed our people. There's famine. We cannot even deal with floods. So we have to pay attention.
And Abel, the government has they've up to now remained mum about this situation. Is it that so much sensitive that they could not make a single comment about it?
I think there's communication that is going on between the Kenyan government and the Ethiopian authorities, of course, under the leadership of the Prime Minister, who's, of course, handed in his resignation letter. They want to make sure the refugees are returned in a manner that is not alarming. But of course, the refugees are still there. They're still within Kenyan soil. And the intention, of course, is to avoid scaring Ethiopians, so as to avoid, of course, extended, movement of Ethiopians to Kenya. But we have that problem. And the deputy governor of Moyale town reported that They're trying to find out how they can be taken care of so as to avoid a humanitarian crisis.
Yes. Unfortunately, once again, we couldn't get hold of any government official to speak about this matter. Now, Eddie, let's talk about the investment issue we've been talking about, mainly foreign investment from countries like China, who don't look at, necessarily factor in the political situation in any country. And as much as people criticize China, the U.S. also has been enjoying a lot of close ties with Ethiopia, despite the human rights record there. Do you think foreign governments also have a hand, in this kind of, governance, not just Ethiopia, but also other countries in Africa?
I think foreign government have got a lot of responsibilities. Although, in my view, I believe that we should not be quick to prescribe an outward-looking solution to the Ethiopian problem. If you look at Ethiopia and Kenya, for instance, you'll find that the three key leading economies in their orders of excellence are almost the same. You find that Kenya is predominantly a service industry. Ethiopia is predominantly a service industry at around 42% of the Ethiopian economy is service industry. The second being agriculture, which is at about 35%. And then the last one being industry, which is about 21%. Now, if you look at that permutation, and then if you look at what has triggered this most recent violence in Ethiopia, you'll find that it was caused by what we call the Addis Ababa Master Plan, which was basically an attempt by government to take land from the Oromo and put it under the Addis Ababa municipality and somehow rethink idea around industrialization. But then that is in the backdrop of an economy that the second biggest area of production is agrarian. And why is this so? Because when external players like China or the US come and trade only with the government in processes that are not people-led, they tend to force these governments or influence these governments to start having economic production systems or permutations that only do benefit those governments as well as the local governments, such as the government of Ethiopia. So the solution lies within the government of Ethiopia, first of all, to acknowledge that it has got a predominantly service industry and then predominantly agrarian peasant industry, that then the economic permutation should be people-led. Because if you look at the people who are now coming to Kenya, most of them are Oromo, who, again, have been bigger part of the players of people who are being displaced as farmers in Ethiopia.
Well said. And Abel, do you agree with Eddie that solution first should come from the Ethiopian government in order to have some sort of sanity back in that country?
Well, I think from my perspective, the solution to the Ethiopian problem is not mainly economic. Once again, I'll go back to the whole idea of governance or government. I think what Ethiopians need to do as we speak now is to embrace democracy. And I think that should be a lesson not just to Ethiopia, but other African countries. That is Rwanda, and Uganda as well. You can be a strongman for a while, maybe let's say 10, 15 years, but once you exit, what you leave behind is something else that of course will erupt at some point. But we have what we call the pressure outlet in a political environment. If there is, let's say, for example, like something like economic imbalance, and people are given space to demonstrate, to showcase their issues, to talk about what they feel like is not right, it's not possible for them to, of course, engage in violent acts. But once you sit on them, you press them, at some point they'll have to do what? To find a way to even engage in violence. Now, Zenawi was a strongman. Of course, he had a very tight grip on the Ethiopian society. Now, the guy who took over from him could not do the same. So that is where now the Ethiopians have come out. The number of guys who are behind bars have been, set free. Now, if they were not arrested in the first place, we couldn't have had the kind of violence and protest we've witnessed. Guys could have come out and protested the economic imbalance, and most likely, a solution could have been found without what we're witnessing now. So the solution is to embrace democracy, make sure people are given the opportunity to express what they think is their will, and then, of course, they elect their leaders the way they want and solve their problems without any kind of problem.
Yes. Now, let me hold on to that thought. I'm going to come back to you shortly. Let me engage Eddie for now. Now, Eddie, let's talk about the issue to do with debt-ridden kind of an economy. The economists too are saying most African economies, Ethiopia included, Kenya as well, they're debt-ridden. They've had to refer to them as some sort of a false economy. I'm sure this is a subject that you will want to comment about.
Yeah, for sure. These things are all tied in the sense that if you've got an economy that is more state-oriented than people-oriented, you will always have the interest of the state predicated upon the individuals, such as the presidency and such as some departments of state taking lead on economic matters, and therefore you have this idea of economic growth that is predicated on the idea of industrialization and mega projects that do not necessarily help the people. And Ethiopia is one of them, just like Kenya, whereby you find people going to get syndicated loans from abroad, as well as other loans on bigger infrastructural programs that we have seen coming out of Ethiopia. And then the problem becomes this infrastructural development is good because it should spark at least $4 out of $1 investment of them. But a wrong investment, such as what we are seeing out of Ethiopia, whereby you want to negate service industry that is booming and agricultural industry that is booming, and wants to go to what happened in Europe as industrialization some hundreds of years back, won't work for the economy. And then number two is the idea of dealing with corruption, because when people have borrowed money, government have borrowed money, there are feudal governments or imperial governments as the government in Ethiopia, or even as what we have seen in Kenya in the past, and those money are not invested in the right development areas that can have a far-reaching effect in the economy, you're going to have a crisis. You're going to have people having a debt burden of paying back debt on money that did not come out and bring any benefit to the population.
Well said, Eddie, and I really appreciate how you normally have your figures right there. Now, Abel, let me give you the last word here, and there's something we didn't mention, that Ethiopia, as much as it's the second most populous country in Africa, it's also the it's home to the second highest number of refugees. They're from Eritrea, South Sudan, Somalia. I mean, this is yet another reason where Africa cannot afford to have an unstable country in Ethiopia.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Ethiopians have a solution to their problem. And the solution is political. A couple of things. Number one, the Oromo have to be given a chance to produce the next prime minister of Ethiopia. They're the most populous, and for a long time, they've not produced a national leader. I think that is the pressure point as we speak now. And they've come out and said the next prime minister has to be from the Oromo side of the country. Then number two, I think it's an opportunity for them to expand the space, democratic space, so as to allow, civil society and additional political parties. And the smaller group, I think it's called the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, has to, I think, create more ground, more space. So I think the solution is political.
Yes, I think you've delivered your point there. Thanks a lot, Abel, for your input. Always a pleasure to have you on board. Abel Oyoyo is an international affairs expert, as well as Eddie Gisheru, who is a political economist. Many thanks, both of you, for your input. And before we wrap up the show tonight, over to our images of the day. Now, a cultural symbol in a fashion statement, the Basotho blanket has never lost its meaning or appeal, but young designers are finding that they can create something new from the history of their country, that is Lesotho. Now, the blankets were introduced to Lesotho in the mid-1800s before the country became a British protectorate. Legend has it that a British man gave Basotho's king, Moshoshu, I hope I got that right, a blanket which he wore around his neck. But it was not until animal skins became scarce following an outbreak of rinderpest, which wiped out millions of cattle in southern Africa, that the blankets were adopted widely as a shield from high altitude temperatures. Interesting.
I think maybe it was canine. Remember that? Come on.
And earlier on our Twitter poll, we did ask you this question: will Ethiopia's state of emergency affect regional security? Let me just go through one comment here. At Owino Kotieno says, yes, already the region is running on a shoestring budget. Adding state of emergency means a number of Ethiopians will flee persecution. But we have about 10,000 and still counting, according to the Kenya Red Cross. People are still fleeing that country, and they've already set camp in Moyale. Many thanks for watching. You've been watching your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Many thanks for watching. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Let me now leave you with our program.